What's good, YouTube? Once again, we're talking college sports in the Deep South where college football is king. And on the plains of Auburn, the battle cry is War Eagle. Kennard Vernon Stewart here once again for Vernon Speak Sports. We're talking SEC football today. Auburn has a steaming hot date with the LSU Tigers October the 26th, 2019. But a lot has to happen in between that time to determine the heat index of this particular football game. Now, LSU will be a checkpoint for both teams because if you look at it scheduling wise, by the time they play one another, Auburn will have played Oregon, Florida, Texas A&M, Mississippi State by the time the hot date in Baton Rouge rolls around again. Auburn hadn't had a lot of luck in Baton Rouge, hadn't won out there since 1999. Auburn hoping to change that. Had a great opportunity to change that in 2017, but a really shaky second half, allowing LSU to get back into the game and win that one, ruined that opportunity for the Auburn Tigers. So with the LSU Tigers, by the time they meet Auburn, you look at this thing scheduling wise, you know, it's pretty, it's all right. You know, the schedule is all right, kind of sort of similar to what Auburn will face. It looks like the LSU Vanderbilt rotation has rolled around. When you really think about it, I've never seen LSU play Vanderbilt. I'm going to have to go look up the stats to see if this is the first time they play. Leave it in the comment section, guys. Have any of y'all actually physically seen a game between LSU and Vanderbilt? It's kind of awkward, actually, when you think about it. But anyway, the big game September 7th for LSU is going to prove to be a real litmus test for the LSU Tigers, will be against Texas. That game already has a time slated, 7:30 Eastern time in Austin, Texas. I kind of like that home-to-home series there. A good southwestern battle between LSU and Texas. And also, although these two teams are obviously not conference mates, they do battle each other a lot in the recruiting trail. So this will go a long way as far as this would be a big recruiting game, if nothing else. LSU and Texas both coming off of huge bowl wins. Texas with the big win over Georgia, and LSU finally silencing UCF in the Fiesta Bowl. That was actually a pretty good football game, by the way. One of the things that LSU can definitely depend on is a very, very blue-collar type quarterback in Joe Burrow. I was definitely impressed with him. I was definitely impressed with his courage and his tenacity and his command of this particular football team, because we know LSU has struggled a little bit offensively over the past few years. And for Joe Burrow to come in and give some spark and give some life to this LSU offense really makes them a true contender. Pretty decent production-wise, almost 2,900 yards passing, almost 400 yards running the football. He's particularly dangerous in the red zone, especially with that zone read. When you talk LSU football, you can expect to see a little bit more zone read action this year out of Joe Burrow. He's a very, very courageous kind of guy, very competitive. It's not like some quarterbacks who go from, he transferred down to LSU from Ohio State. And it's not like he went from Ohio State to Kent State. He went deep down in the middle of some of the most competitive football in the country and one of the most competitive football teams in the country down to LSU. I think that is huge for the LSU Tigers. Definitely, when you look at the beginning of the season when no one really knew Joe Burrows or what he would potentially bring to the table, everyone all but counted LSU out in that Miami game, and LSU represented very well in a huge victory over Miami to begin the season. A signature win over Auburn in Auburn. Also, arguably the most impactful win of the season was pulling away from Georgia down in Baton Rouge, 36-16. What do we expect from LSU? Well, they got to replace some folks, guys. Devin White is gone. All-American linebacker will not be back. Greedy Williams is gone. Okay. One thing we can say is LSU will have a wealth of talent coming back, also coming off a pretty decent recruiting class as well. But if you look at their receivers, these guys will be arguably one of the most talented set of receivers in the country. One of Joe Burrow's favorite targets, Justin Jefferson, from last year's returning Jamar Chase and Terrence Marshall, and plus they're so deep, Derek Dillon, Racy McMath, Steven Sullivan, among those who will be contributors in the passing game. The offensive line coming back should be relatively talented as well. Also, you talk about the running back position that was so important last year. You have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who will be coming back, and Leonard Fournette, who is a redshirt senior, will be returning as well. We'll keep an eye on that part of the football field. For the LSU Tigers, as you know, media outlets expect LSU to really, really challenge Alabama for that top spot in the SEC conference, well, the SEC West. I really feel that this game, Auburn and LSU, will be one of the, especially depending on what happens in between their meetings, will be one of the best, could be one of the best games in college football that particular day. I think both teams bring a wealth of talent. I think Auburn probably has the edge when you talk about experience on both sides of the football field. You're talking about a fully loaded offensive line, all seniors. You talk about a little bit more experience at the running back position when you factor in Cam Martin and Boobie Whitlow, and a wealth of talent at the receivers. I think receiver for receiver, when you compare LSU and Auburn, you know, I'm not sure. I don't want to be biased and just give Auburn the edge because LSU has some very talented receivers coming back. So I would have to say this is a dead even thing when you really think about what the receivers are asked to do for their particular teams. They can max out the opportunity. So it's even at the receivers part. Where it gets a little tricky for me is the secondary for both teams. I think that's going to be the key in this particular game. I think LSU, you got to give LSU the edge when you talk about secondary. Auburn has so many question marks with the lack of depth at the field cornerback position, where you have Noah Igbenogany, who converted from wide receiver, and you also have Devin Barrett, who has just been kind of playing musical chairs position-wise since his arrival at Auburn. So that's not, to me, that's just not a reliable backup for Noah Igbenogany. Kind of hoping that Zion Puckett, who is a recruit out of Griffin, Georgia, highly recruited secondaryman from Griffin, Georgia, hopefully he will be an immediate impact contributor as some true freshman can be. So, like I said, you know, the schedule for Auburn is pretty interesting leading up to the LSU game. And a lot of folks, when we do a consensus or a vote, you know, all that kind of stuff, or just talk about it, a lot of people feel, hey, if Auburn can come into that game, you know, 5-1, you know, give yourself an opportunity to make a push for the SEC West late, this game would not come at a better time. And my goodness, if Auburn can manage to be undefeated going into that game, which is somewhat doable considering the roster that Auburn has this year. The only issue that I see with the Auburn Tigers, when you really dissect some things, is there are some depth issues in certain situations, in certain positions, like the offensive line. You know, Auburn is going to really, really be on edge offensive line-wise. Although you have a lot of seniors, you just don't have a lot of reserves ready to, come in and immediately fill in if someone gets injured. That's the only dangerous part of this particular offense. And definitely on the recruiting trail, Auburn has to load that thing up with offensive linemen, or else down the stretch, Auburn is going to be in some huge trouble when you talk about the offensive line. So I think this game, LSU and Auburn, will be a pivotal game, assuming both teams hold their end of the deal up coming into October 26, 2019, which I really hope both do, because I thoroughly enjoy watching the Auburn and LSU game. Let me know your opinion about, LSU, Joe Burrow, Auburn leading up to the LSU game, how you guys feel about that. I think that's going to be a real nice checkpoint, assuming both teams do what they got to do leading up to it. But in the meantime, man, it's always great to be an Auburn Tiger. Look very much forward to the Advocare Classic between Auburn and Oregon coming up very, very sooner than we would like to think. Go ahead and like this video, comment, and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. Kennard Vernon Stewart. Until next time, War Eagle.